we're ready.
So here's, just so you know, there's all the.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, content, all in the communication with Elizabeth and the whole.
Right.
Yes, I have got it captured.
What are they called?
And I hope to capture some the other night.
Area in downtown Topeka. Well, there's a name. I can't remember.
Chair, the room is ready.
All right, thank you. So we are back from our Monday night recess, and welcome to the Planning Commission Wednesday, June 26, 2024 meeting. Will you read the the rules for the hybrid format?
Yep.
My name is Will Mansfield, planner, and I'll be helping to facilitate the Zoom video portion of the meeting.
Will, don't push the button.
Oh, sorry. We will work alongside the vice chair to facilitate the meeting's proceedings. I have a few housekeeping items for this hybrid meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself during the meeting and when you are not speaking. The chat function for this public meeting is disabled. All chats will go directly to me. Unless you are participating during the meeting, please turn your video off. This allows the active meeting participants to be seen on screen. You will still be able to hear the meeting. When you are participating, please turn your video on. If you have any trouble, you can send a chat to me. The city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distractions during the meeting. And I'll turn the meeting back over to Vice Chair Hayden.
Thank you, Will. We're both learning here, I think, together. At this point, we will receive any written communication from the public if there has been any.
All written communication from staff, planning commissioners, and the other commissioners has been included. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm off the line there. No, all Republican comment has been included as part of your packet this evening.
That just means we're all in this together.
I am
feel
also
even
learning
better.
myself. I'm on the wrong line.
Has there been any written communication from staff, planning commissioners, or other commissioners?
None this evening.
Okay. And has there been any written action or of any waiver requests or determinations made by the city engineer?
Also none this evening.
Okay. So I will look to the commission. Is there any disclosure of ex parte communications this evening?
I have one thing that I'd like to talk just briefly about. I think all of us do receive a lot of communication. I'm not going to try to drain all of that, but I have had one specific round of communications with the attorney for a neighborhood association. They presented a draft document. It's not ready for publication yet, so I'm not going to speak to that. I've encouraged them to bring that to and make that part of the formal packet when it happens. If anything comes up tonight that makes any of that relevant, I'll make sure and share as we go.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. So then, is there any declaration of abstentions from specific agenda items by commissioners? None? Great. We're all ready to discuss. And is there, at this time, we'll turn to any general public comment. So this would be general public comment on any items that are not on our agenda this evening. Is there anyone here from the public that is here to speak on an issue not on our agenda? Hello. Would you please state your name for us, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the commission.
Mandy Enfield, I know. Mandy Enfield, 1635 Mississippi Street. I have a question. So I thought this was going to be like the public meeting for land development code. And then now I understand it's not, but I thought May 29th was, now it's this one. So my question is, where the land development code comments come after that agenda item, do we know when the meeting that's just exclusively land development code comments, do we know when that is?
So may I take that one, Jeff, or do you need me to defer? So that is, you are correct. That is what we're discussing here this evening. So the only agenda item we have will be the land development code. We will discuss it by getting a presentation this evening from the consultant. We will take public comment on that, and then we will have a discussion amongst ourselves on the for the commission. And all of that will be kind of taken under advisement, and the steering committee is continuing to work on it, and they will take all of the public comment and our discussion and continue to work on it, and then there'll be another draft of the land development code taken by that steering committee. So this is the proper place to be to give public comment on the land development code for the stage that it is at now. There will be more opportunities in the future as well.
Excellent. Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, you have time left.
Since
yes.
the land development code is 533 pages long,
Yes.
we're speaking to the whole code, which is multiple issues. can we have more than 3 minutes?
So that is a topic that's on the agenda this evening. So questions about that will need to be addressed during public comment this evening. But that is one thing I anticipate that we will be discussing this evening is the opportunities, the future opportunities to be heard. But tonight is the right place to be heard for the stage we're at right now.
Okay, and then to be determined if we have 3 minutes or more tonight, or do we only have 3 minutes tonight?
The procedure for this evening, when we turn to the agenda item, there'll be public comment, and all members of the public will be allowed to speak for 3 minutes on the specific item, which will be the Land Development Code this evening.
Awesome, thank you guys.
Any other general public comment not about the Land Development Code or any other item on the agenda this evening? All right, seeing none, we will then turn to the regular agenda. And I believe I've kind of already explained what we're going to do, but we will be hearing this evening from the consultant on the Land Development Code, and they will present to us. They will have the staff time that they would normally have, so that we don't have a limit on that, is that correct? So we will hear that presentation, and then at the end of that presentation, the commission may have questions regarding the presentation, and then at that point, we'll move into public comment, and all members of the public will have 3 minutes to speak on the Land Development Code, and then we'll bring it back to the commission, where we will have a discussion amongst the commission regarding the Land Development Code. And as I said earlier, this is where we are taking input on the Land Development Code. There won't be a vote this evening on the Land Development Code. It will go back to the steering committee for them to consider everything that we discuss here this evening, and there will be future opportunities for the public to weigh in on the Land Development Code. So with that, I will turn it over to staff and to Clarion for the presentation this evening.
Thank you. I'm just going to note, we do have Paul with Clarion on the call with us. Elizabeth couldn't be here with us tonight, but she did record a presentation, so I'm going to try and share that, and hopefully technology works.
Thank you.
Associates, and I'm not able to make it to the Planning Commission meeting this evening, so I've sent a pre-recorded PowerPoint to get the conversation started. The focus of tonight's meeting is to allow the community an opportunity to raise questions or comments that they may have about the draft Land Development Code. In this PowerPoint, we'll do a very brief Land Development Code introduction, stop and allow Planning Commission to guide and accept public input, and then talk about the next steps for moving this project forward. The Land Development Code project has 4 basic goals: identifying and meeting opportunities to meet and implement city goals, particularly those expressed in Plan 2040 and those expressed across other plans and policy documents adopted by the City of Lawrence. The second goal is to help create more predictable development outcomes through the creation of clearer and more objective standards. The third project goal is to simplify and streamline development procedures. And the fourth project goal is to make the Land Development Code, the code itself, more user-friendly and easier to understand. The city has been working towards these goals for the last just about 2 years, led by a project steering committee working in conjunction with the community, the Planning Commission, and the City Commission. This slide presents an overview of the entire project schedule, starting in June of 22 and moving through now, late June of 24. The city has worked to create the draft Land Development Code that's shared on the project website for everyone's review. The goal of this meeting is to listen to the community to discover whether there are any other concerns or changes that should be incorporated into the draft, or whether it's time to move it forward into the adoption process. Once the draft is adopted, it is still changeable. A land development code can be edited over time, can be amended by the community. We like to remind everybody it should be a living document. And as situations and development patterns change in Lawrence, the Land Development Code should be updated to reflect those changes. In this evening's presentation, we're just going to focus on a couple slides worth of key updates to remind everyone of the big changes that are in this draft code to help implement Plan 2040. Some of the key updates include allowing more housing types across all residential zoning districts, allowing a range of smaller lot residential development types, again in a variety of residential districts, identifying and applying a minimum density requirement that has been added to all residential zoning districts, which is intended to increase the overall residential density in the city, and this is implemented directly from Plan 2040. In addition to these residential changes, more areas in the city will be zoned mixed use, which allows residential and commercial development. Planned development projects will be required to comply with some standards that we've labeled above and beyond. The zoning code should get development to the appropriate baseline standards in Lawrence. If someone wants to do something beyond that, then they can request a plan development approval. The code will include block-based design standards that are intended to help infill residential fit more snugly into the context of a neighborhood where it may be going in. Minimum parking requirements have been eliminated. They have not been prohibited. Instead, they're replaced with a parking maximum. Parking can still be provided, and it will be provided. It just isn't required. The exception to this is in some cases parking must be maintained for single unit to duplex conversions. Additionally, there is a range of scale appropriate commercial uses, so that means smaller uses in smaller areas, larger uses in larger areas, allowed in residential districts. This is intended to meet that mixed use qualification that we heard a lot about from the Project Steering Committee and the community. It helps to make the city walkable. It helps to allow people to get to the things they want to get to without having to get into their car to go there. The code includes stream buffer requirements that are intended to protect the edges of streams and allow floods to move through faster. The LDC update includes renewable energy systems as a by right use and an accessory use. These is solar and wind-powered systems that are not utility scale. So they're much smaller scale. They're doing energy production for the site. And then finally, the last key update is that there are more administrative approvals and fewer required public hearings or meetings for projects that comply with the standards in the Land Development Code and Plan 2040. And while a number of things are changing, it's also important to spend a minute talking about what's not changing. Within this code, what's not changing is the zoning on individual properties. It may be renamed, but the goal of the project is to convert from the existing districts to the new districts on a one-to-one basis. So if something is zoned residential now, it should be zoned residential at the end of this process. The only change to that might be if it goes from residential to mixed use, and that would likely be only on higher density residential. Additionally, single unit or single family detached development is still allowed. This code does not prohibit the creation of single family homes. In fact, it includes more opportunities for single family home construction followed by home ownership on a variety of lot sizes. What else is not changing? The existing land uses, so the activities or businesses that are currently taking place, are not required to change under this code, including anything that's designated as a non-conforming use. So the day after the code is adopted, whatever use or business was taking place can still continue to take place. And if it doesn't comply with this code, it's protected by the non-conforming use standards. Fourth, established development, so structures and uses that are in place are not subject to any new design standards unless the property owner chooses to redevelop the property. So the theme across all 4 of these first bullet points is what is in place stays in place. The new code is triggered when somebody decides to start making changes on their properties. 5th bullet, any area-specific design guidelines stay in place. That includes the downtown area design guidelines, 8th and Penn neighborhood redevelopment zone, and the Oriad neighborhood design guidelines. And finally, the main zoning and subdivision procedures remain the same. So if you've learned how to do the rezoning process or major subdivision approval, you'll find that those procedures are carried forward into the new land development code. That's it for the list of changes and not changes at a pretty high level. We want to also share a list of recent, over the last couple months, input opportunities for the public, just to let everybody know that across this project, we have held the door open on many occasions for people to come in and share with us, and they have. So just to let everybody know and remember that starting in about mid-2023 and into early 2024, all the content of Land Development Code modules was drafted and posted for public review. So most everything that we're talking about right now has been available over the last year and a half. Starting on May 3rd, a consolidated draft was posted, so that is all of those sections put together. So that was just about 2 months ago. Online comments have been accepted on that draft this whole time. On May 8th, the Planning Commission held a mid-month meeting that was open to the public to talk about the code. On May 15th through 17th, there were 7 community outreach meetings across multiple locations in Lawrence. On May 16th, there was a steering committee meeting open to the public, and there was public attendance. On May 29th, the Planning Commission again talked about the Land Development Code in a public meeting. On June 12th, the Planning Commission held their mid-month meeting, and that was open to the public. On June 20th, the Steering Committee held their most recent meeting. That was open to the public, and there were participants. On June 26th, this evening, the Planning Commission is opening up the Planning Commission meeting to listen to the public on the Land Development Code. And on July 8th and 9th, there are 10 additional outreach meeting slots for neighborhood meetings. So those have been directed at neighborhood organizations or organized neighborhoods. There's not always the same thing in Lawrence, at the request of some organizers in those groups for additional meetings. When the Land Development Code starts going through the adoption process, there will be additional opportunities to comment on the code. So, based on the information received by the Planning Commission this evening, additional information that may be received on July 8th and 9th, comments that have been submitted by the public, comments that have been left in the draft Land Development Code, staff comments, steering committee comments, Planning Commission comments, and what may be City Commission comments coming up shortly in early July, changes will be made to the draft. That may sound like a lot, but we actually anticipate that most of the edits will be focused on fine details. Should something be 10 feet apart or 12 feet apart? Should something be 10 feet tall or 12 feet tall? And the changes we anticipate will impact less than 20% of the document. We will make these changes in tracked changes, so in underline and strikeout. They'll be shown in a draft, and that draft will be posted for public review. And to start the hearing process, it will be posted on July 19th. There will be an update to the project website, identifying the hearing dates, and letting everybody know when they can provide more comments on the project. Project comments are open right now, so we encourage everybody to not wait. If you have something to say, there's an email address that you can submit it to on the website, or you can comment in the document directly. There will be another steering committee meeting on July 18th, which is open to the public, and I anticipate there will be more Planning Commission meetings, so please check their agendas. We want to thank everybody who made the time to come this evening and share their thoughts and comments on the Land Development Code. It's an important document for the community, and we want to make sure that we're hearing what the community has to say about it. Thank you.
Is that the entire presentation, or do Gabby and Paul have something additional for us?
That's it for now, and then I think we are ready to take questions and comments and make sure that those get turned around to the steering committee for further discussion.
Great, thank you.
Question
Yeah,
for Paul or Gabby. On the 8th and the 9th, those are additional sessions for public feedback. Can you talk a little bit more about what's planned, the times, the places, that type of thing? I know there are a number of people here that have expressed the desire to be in a forum where questions can be asked and answered and speak on, in more length. I think those might be a great place for that to happen.
Yeah, that is, I think, the type of discussion that will be possible at that time. And it is just sort of focused on specific neighborhoods. That was sort of the direction that we heard, is that a lot of the neighborhoods wanted a time to talk about the issues that were most important to their neighborhood. But I think in terms of the structure of those meetings, the intention would be that those would be opportunities for people to share their thoughts and provide feedback in an unfiltered, sort of free-flowing way.
And I might also add, we sent that notification out through our email distribution list that we have for neighborhood contacts, and LAN put it on their email list serve as well. We have received a number of, basically it takes them to a survey where they can pick their top 3 time choices.
Oh.
And we have received a number of neighborhoods that have completed that. So we're working now to get those, to contact those neighborhoods and get those scheduled.
And this isn't limited to just somebody that's a member of a neighborhood association. It's open to anyone in the community. The meetings will be.
These were directed more towards the neighborhood. We did the open public meetings in May, and we heard that we wanted to have more opportunities that were specific to neighborhoods.
Okay. Would it be possible to, as a part of that, as long as the motion's underway, to have an open forum component as well? So if you're not a part of for whatever reason, you're not a part of a neighborhood association, you've still got a place to go and have a conversation at length?
Sure, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else have anything at this time, questions for staff or for Clarion before we go into public comment? No? Okay. At this point, we will open it up for public comment. So we will go through the people in the room, and we will also, and will help me make sure that if you see hands raised online, to address people online. Everyone will have 3 minutes, and we asked that you stay to the 3 minutes just simply for fairness. That's why we have that rule. I will try my best to indicate if you're close to your 3 minutes, and unfortunately, I will have to let you know if you've reached the 3 minutes. So with that, please feel free to make your way to the podium. Please state your name before you address the commission.
Hey.
Hello.
Me again.
Mandy, right?
Yep, Mandy, 1635 Mississippi Street. I serve as president of the University Place Neighborhood Association, and I've been working to understand and track the Land Development Code updates for the last year. I got in my emails and looked when I first started emailing the neighborhood and talking about it. It's been almost exactly a year. I've been watching steering committee meetings, going to LAN, talking to folks who are connected to it, either on this body or on the steering committee or informed from other neighborhoods, just to really get an understanding and be able to bring informed comment to this body. And to any of the things, when the engagement session, like when I'm asking questions or writing comments, I want to know what I'm talking about, so my comment will be taken seriously. So what I want to ask is, for this body first, in the future meetings, to consider that 3-minute limit, because I wrote as little as I could on 3 separate topics. I got 1.5 paragraphs per topic, and it came out at 9 minutes. Like, we can't speak on behalf of an entire neighborhood on a 533-page document in 3 minutes to this body. I know we can email, we can do all these things, but I think it would be helpful to have these things said out loud and to have the interaction. So I don't know how you guys want to work it out logistically, but either like what I would like is 3 minutes per topic. Like, I want to talk about infill, occupancy, and parking would be helpful to me. But however you guys think you can handle logistics of that, I know it would be difficult, but it definitely needs more time. There's no way to address this stuff in 3 minutes. As you know, the Land Development Code document is a moving target. It seems to be updated after each steering committee meeting. The first time I visited it a year ago, it didn't show like the occupancy increase. It didn't show duplexes in R2. You know, like, it was a totally different document. And then I visited a month later and it's plot twist, you know. So every time you go to it, you're continually learning and continually sort of like reinventing your perspective. So the consolidated draft is extensive, continuously changing, and difficult to understand. Engagement for modules 1 and 2 took the better part of 2023, while the most relevant module and the most complete document was only intended to be processed and finalized in 1 to 2 months. So like she said, we got it mid-May, and that's when like the R2 chart was filled out with setbacks and stuff. So until midway, we didn't even have like those basic pieces of information. Consequently, I fully support Land's request for a 90-day window that allows citizens to review a final unchanging document. This will allow the consultants and steering committee to provide solid answers to our questions after they have made final decisions. I understand the frustration that would come with extending this already delayed timeline. However, I repeatedly hear your frustrations on the meetings and in my conversations with members of the steering committee, this body, and other folks, that citizens aren't participating and sharing their feedback.
We appreciate that. I'm sorry, I do have to let you know you've gone over that 10 minutes.
So this is our feedback. We need more time. It's difficult, and we've been working on it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Please.
My name is David Hinches. Not sure what else I need to report.
Your name's fine.
The one thing I didn't hear when their goals were being listed is how do we capture the desires of the voters, the members that are going to be in the communities or the neighborhoods that are going to be impacted by the development code. And I would have thought that would have been something pretty standard primer. I know there's a lot of thought around infill, and some folks are very much for it. Quite honestly, I am. If it's a green field, if it's an existing neighborhood, I think somehow the existing members of the neighborhood need to be asked or vote on or something. I'm not sure the procedure and how you do that, but many of us have lived in the community for many years, and we've established what we consider a pretty good neighborhood. If someone would come in and change it radically, that just doesn't seem appropriate. And so I'm not sure where you go from there, but that would be a big issue.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, my name is Melinda Ball. If we are going to be serious about climate action plan, navigating the changing climate, and protecting sensitive lands, then preserving floodplains should be written in the Land Development Code. In 2002, Lawrence considered a ban on floodplain development. More data, stronger storms, increased rain per event, and 22 years later, prohibiting floodplain development makes more sense than ever before. The flood of 1993 cost taxpayers what would be nearly $7 million today to repair streets, sewers, and other infrastructure. Considering Lawrence has grown, flood recovery would far exceed $7 million. The federal government also spent what would be almost $10 million today to assist farmers, families, and businesses recover from the 1993 flood. Building in a floodplain is a costly and bad idea. Unfortunately, flooding is becoming a more regular occurrence. It is only a matter of time until we face another flood the size or larger than we experienced in 1993. Our state neighbors are dealing with historic flooding right now, where rain is falling at the rate of over 1 inch in 15 minutes. Iowa Governor Reynolds stated areas have water levels above what was set in 1993. Minnesota is having to manage a dam that experienced partial failure, and homes downstream are being evacuated. Missouri has extended their state of emergency ahead of more flooding along the Missouri River, and more rain is expected later this week. As of October 2023, FEMA received recommendations by the Technical Mapping Advisory Committee, which includes a ban on floodplain development for commercial and residential use. More recently, a letter signed by multiple national organizations urged FEMA to follow TMAC's recommendations to prohibit fill and build development in floodplains. With considerations being evaluated at a federal level, it would be prudent for our local regulations to ban floodplain development for commercial and residential use. Once we take this proactive step in preserving the remaining floodplains, we will set up our community to earn a larger flood insurance premium discount. Instead of the 10% we currently have, Lawrence could enjoy up to a 45% discount. By excluding commercial and residential development in floodplains, we can mitigate the community's expense of flooding and help our neighbors in flood-prone areas save on insurance. Please enhance the floodplain regulations to explicitly prohibit development in these ecologically sensitive and climate-critical lands. And I also support extending that 90-day period for the community to review the final draft. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Dominique. I'm here to advocate change in our development code for all our human and non-human relatives that live on this land. Additionally, I'd also like to request that 90-day extension for additional public comment. In our discussions about land use and development, we often focus strictly on human uses and needs. For just this moment, I want us to step outside that framework and look through a different lens, one of responsibility, duty, and relationships. What I speak of is not new. It's an indigenous lens, one that holds true for all indigenous peoples, whether from the Americas, Africa, Asia, or Europe. Our earth is our first mother, and without her, we would cease to exist immediately. She gives abundance with life, with the understanding that we are to steward, integrate, and hold responsible for the relationships between us humans and our non-human relatives. For the plants and the animals provide us with foods, medicine, shelter, fibers, and beauty. The water provides us life, food systems, and reprieve from the heat. And yet we take all this for granted, extracting, consuming, and shirking our duties as part of this interconnected ecosystem. We are facing the consequences. Climate change is happening rapidly. Weather is becoming more extreme and unpredictable, with historic events happening every single year. In 2019, we experienced a 500-year flood event. Last year, we had a heat index over 130 for several days. And currently, our northern neighbors are dealing with flooding that is worse than the 1993 flood event that resulted in us adopting our current floodplain regulations. To think that we will be unaffected in the future is arrogant and naive. Future generations will continue to deal with the consequences of our current actions. Because of this, I advocate and demand we create stricter land use policies. Article 13 is regarding ecologically sensitive lands, including floodplain development. We need to create and incorporate language that bans all residential and commercial development, including fill and build, in the floodplain to align with the intent and spirit of our current regulations, which are being skirted. We must protect these lands, which include wetland complexes, not only for ourselves and our children, but for the plants and animals that also call these lands home. We must sacrifice profit and convenience for the life and prosperity of all relatives, human or non-human. We must remember our place as a participant in these relationships. We are an adaptable species. Figuring out how to develop without destroying our environment is not beyond our intelligence, our ability, and our innate part of this ecosystem. We also must increase public accountability measures when talking about developments near or in ecological sensitive lands. Currently under Article 16 Code 20-3205C, floodplain development permits are not subjected to public hearings or consultation. They are approved by a select few individuals that are not elected by the public public and apparently can be swayed by private developer lawyers. We do not have a system where the public can challenge errors made by administration, and this is an egregious oversight by the city. Floodplain development affects everyone, not just the surrounding private landowners. There needs to be due process and the public accountability so we can advocate for those who cannot. The city has already issued a development permit for the New Boston Crossing and development that will destroy 5 acres of wetlands and affect the Haskell-Baker wetland complex in numerous ways. This was approved under a faulty H&H study, which does not conform to our current code, yet it was already rezoned under the assumption that we are following all due processes. We have already failed the first step, though. We continue with this idea that destroying more sensitive land will solve our housing issue and provide economic relief, but this is a false assumption when you consider over half the residents in Lawrence are not owned by that to dwell in it. I advocate that you adopt a public hearing procedure for the floodplain development permit so we can challenge these false claims and advocate for those who have yet to be born or cannot speak our human language. Better yet, please ban all residential and commercial development in the floodplain and all ecologically sensitive lands to begin with. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment?
Good evening, Marcy Francisco, 1101 Ohio. I met with some other residents earlier this evening and just wrote down a few comments that I do want to share with you. I was surprised to hear the comment that even if parking is not required, it will be provided. Oread neighborhood has a number of residences that were developed in the late 1800s without parking. And so maintaining existing parking isn't going to make any difference in the neighborhood where I live. A commercial property that is a single lot on a residential block could use up all the on-street parking on that block. And this is a situation that does exist in our community. If permit parking is to be the answer to restricting new residential and commercial development on public streets, we need to know the requirements for getting that permit parking and how it will be implemented. At one point, there was a requirement for a percentage of the homeowners on that block to support that permit parking. Well, 95% of the land in the Oread neighborhood is not under home necessarily ownership or people living there, and so that might not again work. If those permit parking opportunities are not in place before the parking requirements are eliminated, then the city may be encouraging development that is not sustainable, right? You tell somebody, build this, you can have a commercial property, they assume that you can park on the street, and then that doesn't work out. And I also want to mention we have a crazy situation in our codes, not necessarily the land development code, but they say that there is no requirement to have an area for trash collection if you live in an area where it's served by dumpsters. Well, we have a neighbor who just asked the city to take the dumpster off their property because they'd rather have a parking space. So we could then be creating a neighborhood that has no opportunity for trash collection. I do want to support comments about multi-use development, but I also hope we have a variety of neighborhoods throughout the community. So we want multi-use within a area, but we also want some different opportunities for neighborhoods within our community. And I want to add my support for restrictions on developments in floodplains. I really appreciate the opportunities for neighborhood groups to have an opportunity, and I'm going to be one of our neighbors that takes advantage of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Additional public comment?
Hi, my name's Sam Rogowitz, and I live in Lawrence. And I think this is a really exciting opportunity to be able to align our land development code with Plan 2040, which, as you know, states multiple times that we wish to conserve sensitive ecological spaces, including floodplains. So it just makes great sense. This is the time. I just want to echo what's already been said. Let's take this time to just ban development in floodplains for residential and commercial uses. It just doesn't make any sense to leave this open. I know that we have really high standards for building in floodplains currently, but unfortunately, as we saw with the approval of the new Boston Crossing, those standards weren't met, and the project still was able to go forward. So I don't feel like those standards are high enough. Why don't we just make it clear and just bite the bullet and stop the opportunity for people to bypass our development standards? If we wanted to change, like Dominique was saying, Article 16 to add some public oversight to make sure that when these permits are being approved that they're actually following code, that might be one thing, but I think it would just be, a lot simpler and cleaner and more responsible, honestly, to just ban it outright. We know that floodplains serve important ecological functions. They're carbon sinks, they're groundwater filtration, and maybe most importantly, they buffer us from catastrophic floods. We've seen our neighboring states like Iowa just a couple of days ago are dealing with catastrophic floods. We know the effects of climate change are real, and we're just going to see these events more and more. So I feel like it would be the most responsible thing for, community safety, just for people's lives, to take this out of the equation. As well as the most economically responsible thing to do for taxpayers and the most environmentally responsible thing to do. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Any more public comment in the room?
Hi, Phil Engelhardt. My wife and I are Pinckney neighborhood residents. My comments don't reflect any formally adopted consensus of the neighborhood because we don't have one yet. But rather my own personal opinion. I'd say first, starting out, that I generally agree with Mandy's take that the process has been pretty daggone messy, and maybe that's unavoidable. But we need time to consider this thing and try to work out the many bugs that might be present. Tonight, I just want to reiterate 4 things just to make sure that I think I'm on the right track, but I just want to make sure that I am and that you all agree. If you don't agree, let me know. The way I'm reading the code right now is it sets R2 zoning districts, the old RS5, RS7, by right administratively permitting of projects that convert single-family detached housing into duplexes will require no neighborhood notification. Right? We agree on that? There will be no process available to comment or appeal an approved permit. That's point 1. Point 2, similarly, permitting new denser forms, that is duplexes through quadplexes in R2, no mandatory requirements for neighborhood notification, and no structured comment or appeal avenues. We're on the same page here? We agree with that?
So at this point in time, we can't respond to your questions,
Okay.
but
Okay.
we're certainly happy to take
I'm
your
sorry.
public comment.
Duplex conversion will require that existing parking capacity, i.e. that associated with the current single-family detached unit, be maintained. I think Elizabeth spoke to that this evening. But even though the result will be increased housing unit density, there will be no additional minimum parking requirements. We're going to maintain the existing parking capacity, but we're not going to add any more spaces, even though we're increasing density. Lastly, infill redevelopment for new duplex to quadplex forms will not be subject to requirements to provide a specific amount of off-street parking. New duplex to quadplex development, infill development, will not be subject to requirements to provide a specified amount of off-street parking. don't know how much time I got left, 2 general points. These kind of code experiments like Lawrence is going through right now, people all over the country are doing the same thing, okay? I mean, you know, it's everywhere. The need for more housing stock, you know, and the economic and environmental arguments for denser forms, they're all very persuasive. We get it. I mean, we need to do it. I sincerely hope that our efforts will be positive. However, for me, the basic question remains, given, you know, the way the thing is structured right now, given our currently incorporated dimensional standards, along with the recently conceived ideas of form-based neighborhood specifications, block standards.
Please wrap up. Sorry.
Okay, well, that was better than I usually do. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. I thought you were going to give me a little bit of your time.
I think I'm heavy to give you.
Scott Robinson, 4210 Nicholas Drive. As I've stated previously, I was nominated or elected to be the president of the Albemarle Neighborhood Association. I very, very much appreciate your time and the opportunity to make comments. I am so in awe of your commitment to this. The Albemarle Neighborhood Association is opposed to a blanket R2 zoning change to the Land Development Code. It allows too much laxity to infill for established neighborhoods. The Albemarle Neighborhood Association requests P2, which is open space zoning for the golf course. R2 zoning is in effect down zoning that decidedly devalues our neighborhood and changes the existing properties to a non-conforming use, which is also devaluing. An example of a non-conforming use would be problematic when you went to sell your property if it was out of compliance with code. It's our desire to protect these precious green spaces that are also a watershed, to piggyback onto all the great talk about floodplain protection, and the ecosystems that exist currently on the Albemarle 9. Public uses currently in place for this area are fishing and golf and walking trails, so it is a public space already. Albemarle has always been represented to be a golf course by Bob Billings and the current owner, specifically when he was requesting approval for building apartments. The Albemarle 9 is not suitable to development. It's a green space that's not ideal for any density, and it's prohibitive to anything affordable. We're most concerned about the loss of this precious ecosystem within this green space that is an integral part of the Albemarle development as visioned. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take, Will, is there anyone online? If you're online and you're interested in giving comments, please indicate by raising your hand and letting us know, and we can continue with in person, but then we'll know whether or not people online are queuing up. So if there's anyone in person who'd like to give comment, please feel free to make your way to the podium while we look to see if there's anyone online.
Randy Swain, Albemarle Neighborhood Association. I'll be brief. There's a perception that we were late to the party. I'd like to clarify that 3 of us attended meetings last fall during the assessment period, and we expressed concern about issues unique to Albemarle. We were given reassurance, so we became inactive until March of this year when we saw the draft code and became active again. I would like to, we've also attended the input meetings that were held last month, and I would like to request at this time a time slot for the afternoon of Monday, July 8th for the next set of input for the Albemarle Neighborhood Association. Thank you.
Thank you. Will, I'm not seeing any hands online, are you?
No, I'm not.
Is there any additional comment?
Actually, I think there is someone online.
Yes.
Madam Vice Chair, I apologize. I do not have a raise hand function on my Zoom. I would like to speak briefly if I could.
Yes, of course, please.
My name is Greg Musil. I'm an attorney, and I've been asked to assist the Albemarle Neighborhood Association in understanding and evaluating and then responding to the last consolidated draft of the revised LDC. And I think it's important that the Planning Commission and the Steering Committee, and ultimately the City Commission, take into account the uniqueness of individual neighborhoods and the character that those neighborhoods have built up over the years. These are not haphazard developments, and certainly the Albemarle neighborhood has been a planned neighborhood with a diverse housing stock, from large single-family homes, zero lot lines, to townhomes and to apartments, as well as businesses within what is considered the Albemarle neighborhood. I'm a little concerned tonight about what I heard initially in the recorded PowerPoint. There's a notion that a one-to-one zoning in the new code is equivalent to one another. But just because a residential development zone district goes to another residential district is not equivalent. And I think to suggest that to the citizens of Lawrence is a little misleading. When the Albemarle residents are next to a long-established RS7 golf course, promised as open space with sensitive environments, waterways, and green space beneficial to the company, to the city, and those can be changed by this code to allow duplexes and R2 density, that is not an equivalent zoning. And to suggest it's one-to-one is simply not fair to the people that live in the area of Albemarle or the rest of your city residents. The other thing I heard was that the only changes anticipated are technical changes. We might change the setback from 10 feet to 12 feet. There are major dramatic changes to this that will affect existing neighborhoods and could dramatically affect the neighborhood I represent, which is Albemarle Neighborhood Association. I'd urge the Planning Commission and the Steering Committee to take care to protect existing neighborhoods. I like the discussion about floodplain, sensitive lands, and open space, because that's what the Albemarle neighborhood is trying to protect. I very much appreciate your highly paid volunteer service. I know this is a long and difficult process. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else online? I apologize that not everyone has the raise hand function. All right, seeing none, is there anyone in the room? We come back to in-person comment. Anyone in the room like to give in-person comment? Okay, once we close public comment, we will not be coming back to public comment. I'll be bringing it back to the commission, and the commission will discuss what it's heard this evening and other concerns that it has. So last call for public comments. All right, seeing none, we will bring it back to the commission for discussion. I think we've got a lot to talk about. This is not the only time that we'll be talking about this. And my thought was perhaps kind of going somewhat topic by topic. If a topic is kind of raised and other people have questions regarding that same topic, I'll try to keep a bit of a note. Of course, you can raise anything at any time, but just to try to manage some of the big stuff, it'd be good if we kind of tried to be a little organized. I appreciate your help in directing me that way. Anyone like to get us started?
I'll jump in. I took some notes. I'm on the steering committee as the planning commission's designated member there. So I have some insights on a couple of things that I'd share. I'm not trying to be directive with this, but just share some of the sense that of some of the reasons why we've approached some of these things. And I want to just open the conversation up a bit around the request for 90 days once the final draft is produced. I'm a little bit confused about that request, so I just want to try to make sure I understand it well. From my perspective, and I think others on the SteerCo would consider that we are in that review period of time. And it's greater than 90 days. It's been going on for months and months now. Began more informally with series of public forums that were happening. There were neighborhood forums, industry-type forums, individual public forums, but certainly the largest collective of public meetings that I've been a part of for any one topic. That's all come together then in this, what's been called this consolidated draft, right? All of these different pieces that have been working along. And as you would want, at least as I would want, as we engage with the public in all these different venues, including here tonight, it's an opportunity to capture feedback, to get ideas, to discuss those things, and to have that show up as either topics of discussion for changing the code or actual changes in the code. We've seen quite a bit of that's gone on. This particular forum isn't necessary, well, it never was designed as a Q&A forum, right? It wasn't meant to, I'm not saying that, I don't even know what the path would be for that to happen, but it hasn't been that, it's not structured for that kind of thing. But there are opportunities that are specifically designed for that. And that's the next round of that is July 8 and 9. And if we can add some general sessions to it, that's the place where the longer conversation can be had, where you can exhaust a list of concerns, where you can talk to planning staff and the consultants that are involved, get answers to questions and make points that you just can't do in 3 minutes. I completely agree with you. 3 minutes, there's no way you can do a deep dive on anything in that amount of time. You just can't do it. That's precisely why these other avenues, these other opportunities were designed, were presented out there. So regardless of what we decide to do on extending time, for other comment, I want to really encourage everyone to not wait for something called a final draft, but to engage in that right now, so that as this all comes together and as this next update is produced, I think she said July 19th, is that right? Sure. That we've had the chance to incorporate all the feedback that comes from everyone in the community, everyone on the Planning Commission. So I want to share those thoughts.
Yeah. I actually had a question for staff as we move into this procedure question. There was a comment about that there would only be technical changes, and I just want to make sure I understand. Right now, we're handling and taking public comments on many, many different, even high-level policy type of changes and suggestions. And then at some point, it's my understanding that the consultants refer to the approval process, I think they call it, and that's when we're like, okay, this is basically everything we want, but there may be some more technical, smaller changes. Is that correct, or am I misunderstanding that?
I think what Elizabeth was saying was we were just anticipating that most of the changes would be technical in nature, because a lot of the larger items the steering committee has already discussed and had conversation about it has come up previously. So we were just noting that we anticipate them to be more of that line. That doesn't mean that a larger change can be made. It absolutely can.
When you say we are anticipating, at which stage? Are you talking about the current stage we're currently in? You're not anticipating large changes, you're only anticipating technical changes?
At the moment we are, yes. But that doesn't mean that we can't have large changes. We certainly can. We were just anticipating going forward. We had all those big conversations with the steering committee. We'd had a lot of that input. So we thought we had a lot of the larger things addressed. But that doesn't mean that we can't go back and address them again.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that question that was asked by the public. So.
Yeah. And please, just I should have said this, but please send complex thoughts, recommendations, the questions you have, send those in writing and send them so they could become a part of the public record. I was on a call just today with Mr. Musil, who spoke tonight, and speaking on behalf of the Albemarle Neighborhood Association, where they're putting together a draft document with very specific recommendations they want to have heard as a part of this process. It doesn't go on deaf ears. It's absolutely the best way to deliver complex thoughts and complex recommendations. So please, please, please provide that.
And can we continue with the procedure issues?
Yeah.
Is that cool?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Does this steering committee have the same type of inbox we did for the rewrite of the wind reg, such that everything that gets sent in gets to those on the steering committee?
I'm going to say no. We didn't have a consulting firm, and planning staff was really just channeling as opposed to capturing and not filtering, but digesting and then applying what they've read to the code. So our role as Steerco is very different than the four of us were on Wednesday.
I just want to make sure that the public's comments and feelings are getting heard, getting read by the appropriate people.
If I may, just to politely correct Commissioner Rexroth there, we do have an email address dedicated for the development code, and it gets sent to the staff and to the staff and the consultant team, and we do take a look at the comments that do come in, and those that rise or are addressed to the steering committee we put in their packet as part of their stuff. And so you'll see some of that with their agendas and details that come up as part of them. So yes, there is an email that is dedicated to that.
And we also will include comments in your packet moving forward, but there's also on the project website a space dedicated for the public comment that we have received, where it gets put in that area too.
There are other thoughts about the procedure and the process from planning commissioners?
Yes, I do. As I understand the thank you. There's two of them. I don't think it's that important, but maybe. As I understand the process, it is really our staff who has the responsibility of drafting the revised zoning code, the land development code, and that the city commission passed a resolution that decided to have a steering committee made up of 14 very specific and qualified and competent people. And this steering committee, in many ways, represents our city. There's a lawyer and an architect and an engineer and a neighborhood person and a commercial real estate person. And that is a fabulous thing that I think has happened. And that steering committee is there to work with the consultants who will advise the steering committee, will advise the planning commission, and will advise the city commission. As planning commissioners, we have a statutory obligation, and that is to make the recommendation to the city commission. No other group has that statutory obligation. I think that is, for me personally, very important. And for me, that's going to require having a final staff-produced code to look at. And I am going to need at least 90 days to read and understand a 550-page legal document. The way the zoning code works, and I've spent a little time in the past looking at the old zoning code, there are lots of different kinds of things we have to consider. And you can't just read through this 550 pages as a novel and understand how it works. And I think that we don't have any time constraints. Our only obligation is to do it right. And I think doing it right gives us the time to reflect on it, gives everybody else who's interested in it time to reflect on it. And I'm going to hope very strongly that we get a final document and that we planning commissioners have 90 days to look at it before we are doing any voting on it. That's particularly important for me because I'm a techie dinosaur. I can't read things online very easily, very well. I make mistakes all the time. I need paper. I need paper that I can write on, paper that I can highlight, and I don't see that anybody so far has thought it was very useful for me to be having paper that's just a draft. I applaud everything that's happened to date, and I think that is a really good thing, but I want to be sure that we finalize it in just as thoughtful a way. I think the comments that I've heard when I've attended some of the meetings are that neighborhoods are all going to be treated uniquely and with the context of the neighborhood. And then I've heard, no, there are going to be rules that are set for each district. And no, the zoning may be different than the covenants, and maybe you'll have a piece of land that you can't develop because you can't meet both the covenants and the zoning code. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Maybe we're going to be inviting neighbors to sue each other because the covenants aren't being complied with. My neighbor decides to tear down his house and build four properties. And I say, no, our covenants require you to have a house of a certain size and have a 2-car garage. So the only thing I can do to enforce those covenants is to take it to court. I don't think we want to build conflict into our neighborhoods. And I think Mr. Musil made a very good point that we really have a lot of unique and wonderful neighborhoods, and we need to protect them. And I think that's certainly one of the things I know that I'm going to be focused on when I look at the 553 pages. So thank you for the opportunity to use both speakers.
Microphones.
Jane, can I ask a question about how do you think about this ultimately getting to a place of conclusion? Will at some point get to this thing we call a final draft, where we and others are done providing feedback and all those changes are made, and at that point we stop and say, okay, let's print that off and have a chance to digest it. Do you see that being just a function of understanding what we've all contributed to, or do you think that we start another round of revision at that time?
I think it is then up to the Planning Commission and the City Commission to do, the Planning Commission to do the recommendations and the City Commission to do the final adoption or modification. I think at some point, as wonderful as your steering committee is, and as wonderful as the staff is, it's like any other piece of legislation. The staff does it, and then it goes to the people who are legally obligated to do the recommendation and legally obligated to make the decision. And I think that I think the process is a continuing process with slightly different tasks for each of those opportunities. And I think that the staff and the consultant, and most importantly, the steering committee, are doing a great job of trying to gather in everything so that it is as thoughtful and complete a document as possible. But then I think it moves on to the Planning Commission and then to the City Commission.
Points.
Others?
Jane, I've never seen you looked at you as if you were a dinosaur. I will say I too am that dinosaur, that I think the reasoning behind the planning committee needing, specifically Charlie Thomas, needing time to go over and digest and look at and consider 500 and however many pages it's going to turn out to be is important to me. And I don't understand a reason for a rush either. So I would certainly support, if it takes 120 days or whatever the time is, I don't want us to say at the end of 90 days, you have to make a decision then. When we have digested it, when I have digested it, thought through it, said what I need to say, heard what I need to hear, that will be the time I'm ready to vote on it. But it is certainly not, it's going to be printed the 19th. I want that final copy and then go through it and look at it and digest it, however long that takes.
I'm going to say first, well, obviously, not a dinosaur, and very, very eloquently said in all that you did. And this might sound strange for me, being a tech-centered guy. I don't mind looking at documents online, reading them on my laptop. I don't really like them on my phone, but I absolutely detest documents in redline mode and in track changes modes. I want to see the final document. So I do echo Jane and Charlie's sentiments that at some point the document has to be submitted as is. It's like no more changes at that point. And at that point, that's when hopefully we have done some of our homework up to that point where we're familiar with parts, not all the document, but certainly parts, because you can't go through 500 pages in even a month or a week to get ready for it. I do remember wind and solar, we had 2,500 pages of, that was just people's comments for a 37-page document. So for this 500-page document, how many pages of public comment are we going to need to digest? Because I do think each and every one of us want to hear from everybody out there that wants to let us know how they feel. It's important. None of you would be here if you didn't care. You're not here for the fun of it. You care about your neighborhoods, you care about this code, and we owe that to everybody to put that thought into it, and we need time to look at a final draft before we make our recommendation.
Others?
I guess a question for staff would be, at what point would you consider a draft to be final?
Leon may correct me if I step astray here, but I would think that July 19th would be pretty close to a final draft, subject to comments and suggestions that we would receive after that publication date. That would be the hope we'd be shooting for.
So that would be, the timing would start at that time. We'd lock changes at that time, gather information, gather feedback for one last pass at adjustments that needed to be made.
That'd be the hope, but then again, you also have a steering committee that will occur the day before the 19th. So if the steering committee wants to change or have an alteration to it, that may affect what that looks like. And just as a reminder, you'll have this also on your July 24th agenda to have a very similar discussion. So there's a likelihood we get to the 19th and we have a comment that occurs the day before and we need to make a change, and that may not fully have time to come in. So there is a bit of that calendar that we have to keep in mind.
I'm not trying to push back on whatever time people need to thoroughly understand and be prepared to make a recommendation, but I do want us to have some understanding of what this process looks like. So if we're going to say it's final, we log changes, and then there's got to be some method by which other feedback, things that come along that might inform an updated version to that are tracked. The idea being that you can, at some point, get to a place where we say we're done.
Yeah, I think what I heard, Jane, your comments were very helpful. Thank you in putting in my head of how I see the process. And I could be absolutely wrong, but kind of what I'm thinking about at the moment, based on what you've said, is that our role is very different than the roles that are currently happening. We have a statutory responsibility to review and recommend a land development code. And so in order for that portion to take place, everything that occurs before is fabulous and wonderful in getting us to a point, but really then it becomes the Planning Commission's responsibility to take that work and make it the land development code that the Planning Commission feels like it can recommend moving forward. And to get that done, then the Planning Commission has to be able to fulfill its responsibility. But not only as a part of that, the Planning Commission also needs an opportunity to hear from the public at that stage, because that is a different stage. It's almost like we're in an input and a drafting stage, and then we move into the adoption stage, which is really more about the Planning Commission and the public being able to comment on what the Planning Commission is planning to recommend, to vote on to recommend, is kind of how I see what you said. Is that would be kind of your understanding too?
My understanding. So are you wanting to reproduce or redo all of the public forums and public comments and all that work that's gone on up until now?
No, I don't think that's what anybody's saying. I think what everybody is, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what I just laid out is much more about all that's happening right now. And the number one key thing to me for the public to take away from this discussion is now is the time to make all of those changes that you think that you want, or to suggest all those changes, to go to all of the meetings that are happening outside of the Planning Commission And now is that time, because at some point coming up relatively soon, probably July 19th-ish, right, there will be a version that is it's ready to move to the next stage, which would be the Planning Commission looking at it for what was introduced or proposed, and then the Planning Commission doing its responsibility of going through and evaluating what that work that was done. So I don't think we would take public comment on that and evaluate that, discuss that like we have other regulations and whatnot. We wouldn't then be hosting our own working sessions on it in a way that would be duplicating what's been done.
And Gary, you may remember at the mid-month, I was trying to think about how this might happen. And I had suggested that we might have a series of Planning Commission meetings so that they are focused essentially on Module 1, Module 2, Module 3, and then the final draft, only because I think it's somewhat easier to try to focus the comments on one portion of it, rather than having the comments be on any portion anybody
When you
wants
say
to
the
speak.
comments, you're talking about
Public comments on the
of the
final
final
draft.
draft that we've locked for changes?
Right.
Okay.
Because I think the public has a right to comment on it, and I think it'll be easier for me if it's in pieces that are focused on a section of it. I don't know the best way to do that, but I think
It allows us to focus on those sections as well in our discussions if it were broken up that way.
yeah, and maybe there's a better way to do that. I don't know, but it was an easy way to grab, to say 1, 2, 3, 4.
And just for the commission, you probably remember this, but just in case, there was the memo on your March 25th agenda that outlines the state statutory adoption process for the code. It does not follow the Land Development Code's text amendment process. It follows that process that's outlined in the state statute. And so that outlines kind of Commissioner Eldridge's point of it outlines the process, the roles of the bodies that are in there. So it is, you probably remember it, but just wanted to, in case you didn't, that was there, so if you could follow up on what those details are, because it is a little different than what you see as a normal text amendment process.
And so just to click in on that, are what we're discussing right now consistent with how that was outlined? I think.
I think pretty close if I'm following the conversation all the way through. It is, because what would happen is you would, I've got it here so I can kind of look, but a steering committee is going to forward you a document for consideration, and at that point you can concur with the code and it proceeds to the city commission for consideration, or if the commission has questions but like revisions, they can return it to the steering committee for further discussion and work, and then it would return back to you for that consideration process. From that point on, the planning commission's recommendation would then go to the city commission for consideration, and they may approve the ordinance or override the planning commission's recommendation by a 2/3 majority vote of the commission membership. So that's all laid out in that state statute there. So just wanted to highlight that as kind of, you've got the same memo the steering committee got as part of that for that process adoption.
And what I hear the public saying, and I think what I hear Jane saying, is that from the time that the steering committee forwards a document for consideration, people want an opportunity to, and I'm not saying it has to be 90 days or whatever, but people want an opportunity to be able to fully review what is the document that's being submitted for consideration in front of the Planning Commission, and to have opportunity to weigh in on that. It's kind of what I hear. Commissioners want time to do that, and the public wants time to do that. So that's kind of really what I hear. But I do want to be clear, what I also hear is that big changes need to be made before that document is forwarded on. It's not that the Planning Commission won't make big changes, but input is now, while that document is being worked on by the steering committee, so that the document that's forwarded for consideration has all of these thoughts in it. Is that?
I'll just ask a question, because it was kind of brought up the steerco might go away at some point. What is the intention for the steering committee and how it stays involved, or will it be disbanded once the final draft is done? What's the plan there?
It's like with most of those things, they would stay in position until the code runs through to adoption at that point, because it may get sent for more work and you all would still have some meetings to do then potentially.
Yeah, to be more specific, is it the intention, and this is process, right? is it the intention that as feedback comes through, that the steering committee would continue to do the work of taking those questions on and making a recommendation back to the consultant on what should or should not be put in the code?
Yeah, it would be the steering committee's work on that one. And so it's like you can, like, you know, at your mid-month meetings, you can highlight something and have the steering committee look at it, and the steering committee gets those comments and conversations back, and Commissioner Rexford also helps relay the conversation back from your discussions to say, this is what we're talking about, what does this look like? Now, it doesn't mean the steering committee has to concur with what you're putting forward. They might have a different take on it or have a different perspective, and then they might forward something that might not be identical to what you're discussing, but that's their prerogative. They do have that ability to do it just as much as you have the ability to say, yeah, maybe take another look at it, or we hear you, we'd like to advance this on.
I wanted to bring that, thank you. I wanted to bring that up because I believe that City Commission and the way they've chartered this to be done intends for the steering committee to be a continuing function. And we're going to want to think about how we either act or interact with that function as we do our thing. In other words, they don't stop like we did in Wind and then deliver it to the Planning Commission, who then takes it and then goes to the City Commission. The steering committee is going to be involved, if I'm understanding this right, throughout.
Well, it's contained in resolution number 7421. And I think that we should look at that language that's in the resolution. My chair's too short to sit.
Yes. So section 4 of that resolution, upon the adoption by the governing body of the updated land development code, the steering committee shall be retired. That is the first sentence in that section.
But those are different questions, right? So the real point was they will forward a document for consideration for the Planning Commission. It is then pending in front of the Planning Commission, and the steering committee still exists, but their work is, they're not working on the document. They have already forwarded it for consideration. They exist still so that if the Planning Commission sends it back, they exist to do whatever that extra stuff is. I think what Commissioner Rexford is saying is that he believes that tell me if I'm wrong, that the steering committee actually continues to participate in the process after the documentation has been forwarded for consideration. And I think what Commissioner Eldridge has said is the resolution does not actually have that continued participation in it.
I think Mr. Quick read the part of the resolution.
Yeah, so what would happen is typically the steering committee may not meet because there may not be work for them to do, but if it gets sent back to them, they would still be standing and ready to do the work that is put before them. That would be the anticipation with the resolution.
And I'm not trying to advocate one direction or another. What I'm wanting to do is try to head off what I think will be some confusion about that.
Me too.
And try to get a great understanding about that if they are in fact continuing, that we might want to have as a part of our consideration how we interact with them.
Yeah, so is Randy on?
I don't believe Randy is on. Okay. But I mean, the anticipated of that would be is if they forward a document for your review, we wouldn't have them meet. They wouldn't be working on it. They would be waiting for either a response from you, or if you forwarded it on, they would still be kind of in waiting for if something should occur.
And the resolution says when it's adopted by the governing body, which is the very last step, City Commission.
Right.
It stays in place until that happens.
It stays in place. It doesn't stay active. I think what we're...
Nothing that says it's not active though, right?
I believe the state, that's why I wish Randy was here. I believe the state statute...
State statute doesn't talk about a steering committee, just talks about
But it talks about our responsibility.
Our responsibility to recommend.
So I guess the question is, when a document is forwarded for consideration, right, who all is considering it? Is it in front of the Planning Commission for consideration, or is it in front of the Planning Commission for consideration with help from the steering committee? I think that's what we're...
I think there's some open questions about how the steering committee continues to operate.
Yep. Yeah, and we should probably...
And I'm just trying to get that out here, because I think I heard early on an expectation that they're done, now it's us, and I don't think that's going to be the case.
Yes, we should figure that out.
But I don't think that's the case.
I think that the steering committee is there to advise us, and if we are going through our process of recommendation and we say, gosh, maybe we ought to send this back to the steering committee. I think that's what Mr. Quick is saying, not that the steering committee has any ongoing role unless the Planning Commission says, please send it back. Or if then we send it off to the City Commission, the city says, What the hell? Let's go.
So that could very well be a scenario. I think we ought to ask the specific question of the steering committee and the city commission who sponsored this, and just find out what the expectation is. I'm not trying to argue a position.
Oh,
on it.
no.
I'm wanting to get ahead of what I feel like might be some confusion that could be easily solved.
I think it's easily solved, and I think Mr. Quick has a handle on it, and I think that's great. Thank you.
So just one kind of maybe small question. I had asked a question very early on in this work about the Planning Commission's role in this being a legislative function. My understanding at that time was it was not how do I say it?
Statutory.
Not a requirement of statute that the Planning Commission even has a vote on this, but it was by practice and just really great wisdom that the City Commission had asked the Planning Commission to take it on. Did I understand that incorrectly?
There is a statutory role for Planning Commission. It does have to make a recommendation. There is not a role for a steering committee in that same regard.
That's probably what I was hearing. Okay, thank you.
So I just think it is important for the Planning Commission to know that it has each planning commissioner, we have the responsibility, statutory responsibility to recommend. So we are at about 8 o'clock. We've talked about the procedure. Are there any other thoughts or concerns about procedure? I think we have some pending questions staff will get to. I don't think we're going to answer those tonight, right? No, but we'll continue that discussion and kind of work that out. Are there other procedural issues? If not, maybe do we want to take a break before we dive into some of the other non-procedural issues? How are we feeling? Or we just keep going? You want a break?
I'd like to take a break.
We do have a question. Anything on procedure before we break, and then we can come back to some of the substantive issues. And of course, we can always talk about procedure again, but just if we can. All right, let's be in recess for 5 minutes. We'll resume at 8 o'clock. I'm not trying to cut anyone off by topic.
Will, are you ready to go?
I didn't get a break, so if I ask for another break in like 30 minutes, say yes. I know. I'm haven't
Commissioner
been
Thomas?
drinking a lot of money. Commissioner Thomas, we're ready to begin again.
Oops.
I just wanted to gavel.
Good job, Professor.
No.
And you struck it the right number of times, too.
Practice. All right, it is 8 o'clock. We will get back to our discussion on the Land Development Code. I would ask that if you want to have individual conversations, please just take them out into the hallway. We encourage that, but out in the hallway. So my thought now is we're going to come back and talk about some of the more substantive issues regarding the Land Development Code. It's 8 o'clock. We know we're going to see this again. We'll also be discussing it in the mid-month, so we can take it up topic by topic and just see how we're doing and do a check-in later, or we can set a time limit that we want to discuss this evening. Does anybody have thoughts on that, procedural-wise, for this evening? Just give it a go and see where we get. All right, that sounds great.
I would say it'd be nice if we didn't go down too many deep, dark rabbit holes.
Okay. Yes. So
Good luck.
Yeah. Yes. Right. All right. So who would like to raise a topic?
Parking.
Parking. All right.
How about that?
What would you like to say about parking, Commissioner Rexroad?
We, in the Steerco, I'd love to hear the perspectives of the Planning Commission. The steering committee, when we met last couple weeks ago, discussed this very topic again, and it is one of the more charged and divisive topics that are there. On the one hand, there's an argument that says parking is one of the most expensive bits of real estate in town, that it doesn't generate any tax revenue, that it encourages vehicular traffic and doesn't encourage multimodal transportation, and that parking where we've been in the past as a required minimum, should be completely changed to a maximum, and that we let market forces determine whether parking should be a part of any kind of development, with a couple of exceptions. One, most notably, if there's redevelopment from single family to duplex, that you don't get rid of parking to accomplish that. On the other hand, we heard this tonight, and we heard it in our conversations, there's some areas of town that already experience some significant problems with parking. Orion neighborhood is probably the most famous of those. And the experience had there suggests or reminds us that there could be unintended things happen if parking, if we took all of those requirements away. So for example, if a business downtown decides to build and they say, I'm not going to have any parking, we'll just let that flow wherever it needs to go. It could flow out into a neighborhood, it could flow someplace else. Or in the case that was brought up earlier tonight, I think Marcy had said that, you know, if you have a situation where you add density in a neighborhood that's already dealing with parking problems, and there's no provision to require additional spots, it makes an already impossible situation even worse. Mm-hmm. So those are the spectrum from one side to another on that. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Did the steering committee reach any consensus?
Right now, and it wasn't unanimous, of course, but right now in the draft code is a parking requirement, minimum requirements are not there. Elizabeth had that in her preamble as we started. So right now that was the consensus. It was kind of a part of it that let market forces take care of that.
But for instance, in our neighborhood, where we're required to have garage, at least two-car garage parking, where we've had some houses that have become rentals and there are 5 or 6 cars instead of the anticipated 2, there is concern about whether our streets, which are narrower than standard streets because they were all done at one time, are going to be wide enough for emergency vehicles.
Right.
And I expect that we're not the only neighborhood in town that has that as an issue. And so far, we haven't had that as a problem. But if we have more and more cars in the neighborhood, if people develop duplexes and empty lots, if they get developed as fourplexes or continue to be rentals with 5 or 6 cars, how do you deal with that? I think you have to have some solution, because then it becomes a health and safety issue. And I would think it would be one in Oriad, as to whether you can get fire trucks
Where it
and
exists today.
ambulances.
Yeah, is it considered a health and safety issue in Oriad today?
Not that I'm aware of. I know there are some streets and concerns from time to time that kind of crop up, but as far as I'm aware, those haven't been shared with me to date. And the other thing to kind of note on that one is that this code does not change engineering design standards for streets and those kind of details. And so there would be something that would be to MSO and the construction management team about how wide streets need to be, and that would be dictated, of course, by the rights of way that are given on plats and some of those details. So that's a design concern that goes to MSO and doesn't fall in the land development code's scope. Again, just to kind of encapsulate a little bit of the conversation I think the steering committee had was it didn't preclude anybody from building parking. It just said you didn't have to provide any parking. So I think that kind of was the encapsulation of the steering committee's conversation was it just doesn't have that minimum number that you would see in the code like we currently have, where it's got the table in Article 9 and it says if this used then this much, and then that's the automatic. So I hope I'm encapsulating the steering committee's last year really well.
And did they have conversations, I guess, with fire and emergency and like what the ramifications of these changes may be?
We've had conversations with MSO, CMed, Fire Medical. They've been a part of the conversations with the staff, and we've been having this as we've been having just the discussions going on about, what are you seeing? What's going on? What are things that you've identified in this code that, give you pause or you would love to see changed, or don't change this at all? They noted that there are, streets where you run into those situations and you can sign them for parking on one side of the street or no parking on the street if it does get into a situation like that. They've elevated one that I can't remember where it was at, but it has no parking signs for that exact reason, is because it's a very narrow street, and when a fire apparatus goes down the street, any parked car would give it a bit of a difficulty to get around. So that street is signed for no parking. And so that is something they're aware of, and they're tracking along with that. And they're also, very aware of parking on the street is also an item too. And so what different department, the parking department is also looking at what a on-street permit system looks like. And that's something they've been studying kind of in parallel alongside this, but they weren't connected. They were always something. Best way to describe it is these two were never really connected, but they were in some way. That study was already going on, this code was already happening, and then they just kind of naturally came together in that part. So parking is also looking at on-street permitting system as part of what their process that they're looking at for them too. So there's a lot of things that are in parallel tracks or that are not quite in this code that definitely ripple out and get into other codes as part of the process.
Other people have comments or questions? I'd like to weigh in on the parking.
It does seem in a city where rental properties are the majority, certainly in some neighborhoods, being a college-centric town, that this could lead to tremendous issues in certain neighborhoods, the older ones, particularly as the older houses are torn down and we get more dense.
Yeah.
Of course, important to remember that parking is not prohibited.
Right.
Just not required.
Right.
And if the idea, this conversations go that if it made a property more desirable or someone needed parking, that would be something that would attract them to it, and parking would still be something they would want to build. But there is that idea, and I think it's true in a college neighborhood like Oriad, where they experience it today, that exists.
Well, I thought Senator Francisco's comment about if we're going to go to parking permits, let's do that before we take away the parking, because at least then there's a transition that makes some sense.
My understanding was that there's a motion in place today that's working on that. Is that correct?
Yeah, parking, part of transit and parking is working on that currently.
What group would determine, let's just say, okay, this neighborhood, this hypothetical neighborhood that has these 9 square blocks and X number of houses, we're going to do permit parking, and that gets you Y number of cars. What if that's not enough for the people that live there? Who gets to choose who gets the permits and who doesn't?
Jeff.
Probably not me. Just so much. That's part of the question that group is working on right now.
It's the concept, though, right? There's definitely potential problems, unintended things. The positive sides of that, though, how that frees up space for additional infill and additional density, lowers costs of housing where parking might not be required or desired. It enables something that isn't enabled today, was what kind of led me towards supporting the idea of no required minimum.
When is it also then in connection with like sidewalks on both sides of the street and the transportation? And I mean, we're doing other things as well to try to alleviate some need for parking, right? By encouraging people to have more walkability and more biking. I mean, in some ways, those provisions kind of go hand in hand with the no parking aspect of it.
Idea of, of lending more towards, moving more towards multimodal, enabling it, right, in bits and steps.
With an idea of actually discouraging.
Yeah, I'm not a giant fan of a forcing function like that, because I always use my mom as a litmus test for the forced no park. That's not going to work for my 90-year-old mom.
Right.
But she would be when she made it, we made a choice for her where she would live. Parking would have to be a component of that. But I always use her as my test for, not everybody should be forced into a thing. Yes. But if we can enable as a community and then have the opportunity to have, both parking if you want it or not if you don't, maybe there's some opportunity for the community there.
Well, there may be a difference between the established neighborhoods and greenfield development that would make a difference.
Santa, to follow up on that, I'm looking at the rezoning and the changes on the land development code, and will rezoning those already established neighborhoods and neighborhoods that could see potential devaluation of home values or issues with parking, will rezoning those neighborhoods to a different category will fix those issues? Just an idea. As an example, a 7,000 square footage lot on specific neighborhood will have a specific zoning, but a neighborhood 7,000 lot on a new green space will be rezoned differently, just because it's not on that specific neighborhood. Just trying to protect the neighborhoods already established that, do not want to see a fourplex next to their, single-family home. It will protect those 16 neighborhoods, but at the same time will create new opportunities for new neighborhoods somewhere else. And again, I'm not sure that's even legal, but I'm just trying to find a way that will, I don't want to say make everyone happy, but it will, fix or protect specific neighborhoods from become something else.
to your second question, yeah, that's kind of the balancing act that I think you saw Elizabeth allude to, is you balance the infill standards versus the use table in that degree. And so some of those infill requirement standards are going to be there to hopefully balance that out. That's something the steering committee is still kind of getting their hands on, kind of on, and get their minds around what that looks like. But that's going to be the question: is what do those infill development standards look like? One of the surveys that we did, I can't remember if it was, it's been a while. We've done it was kind of go through and say what is important to neighborhoods. What are those things that we should have as those standards and requirements to say these are the key things we should all be looking at? Is it architectural design? Is it setbacks? Is it height or parking and those kind of things? And so that survey and the information we got from following up on those discussions is what's kind of informed those infill standards that we're developing. The first question you have there is it's not a rezoning, it's a zoning conversion. So what happens is the map doesn't rezone. What it does is it just converts from RS to whatever it goes to in the thing there. So it's whatever you are is going to be what it is. It's just a matter of what does that convert to as it crosses over into that new code. So in the case of R2, and I'm going to mess this up pretty solidly, I feel like it's going to be RS5, RS7,
Yes.
and so those would just convert across. So it's not a true out rezoning, if
That's true. Yeah,
clarifies.
that makes sense.
But yeah, you really hit on one of those, that real balancing act that we're seeing in the code is how do you balance that desire for density and the conversation that we have in 2040 for, not wanting to do a lot of that kind of, same density or same kind of configuration, but also protect what's already there, because those neighborhoods have an identity. They have an established sense of place. And that's what we say in Plan 2040 is we want to have those places be unique and their own sense of them, that's them is the best way to put it. And that's a hard balancing act. And that's why I think the steering committee's worked on it quite a lot. I think you all are starting to kind of engage on that conversation too. Just where do you strike that balance is going to be a community conversation at the end of the day.
I see.
Other issues regarding parking, or anybody want to weigh in on parking kind of before we move to some of the other issues? All right. Somebody want to raise another concern or question? Well, since you're pausing, I'll take a moment to leap off of what we were just discussing. There were some comments about the rezoning, right? And it's not rezoning, but like the converting, right? But there was some concern that it's kind of is rezoning, at least in some people's minds, because they're zoned something and they're staying able to do what they currently can do, but now their neighbors can do a whole bunch of other things. And so I just wanted to throw that out there for a conversation, because I do think that is something that I'm concerned about. I don't have an answer, but I would like to at least toss that out as a topic of conversation for people's thoughts and ideas.
Are you saying that's sort of what Jeff was saying about how the communities, the neighborhoods want to stay themselves, but the new zoning requirements or the new zoning districts would allow them to do things without restriction?
Yeah, I mean, basically, right? So it's not exactly just a conversion of zoning, because now there's a lot more things that can go on in one particular zone. So yes, I'm still single family home and I can still do all the things that I could do. But it does mean that people around me are also rezoned for more, right? The more permissive activities, multi-use, et cetera, which does kind of change, at least what I was hearing from the public, that it is kind of a change from the zoning I currently have.
Right.
So yeah.
And I see that as something that would change the neighborhoods potentially, where, if somebody comes in and buys up, several tracts of land, whether it's green space or currently infilled or whatever it is, and they tear them down, which is most likely their right to do so, and they could then put up a fourplex or whatever the requirements are based on the land size, correct? They would be able to sort of build as they wish. So you could have two pretty normal, I guess, air quotes, homes, and then a fourplex right in the middle. Sorry, Kurt. And so don't hurt me. And so that would be my concern, as well as talking through what that looks like for for communities. I think all of us, at least in the discussions and the conversations I've heard, I know this is my first official week, but I've listened to some of your talks and heard some of the discussion in the past. And I think what all of us want is our community to grow and have better housing options and things of that nature. But we can't also bypass the idea that we don't want to sacrifice the neighborhoods that do exist.
I agree with that.
And that really went back to that survey question that we were asking was, if you do this, and what does that aesthetic need to be? What do those details need to be in there? So I don't have a good answer. I mean, it's a tough one to get around. I mean, I've in previous work I've done is, I've worked in neighborhoods where you literally went 5 down the street and every one of them was a different one. It was a single family, then it was a triplex, and a single family, and a duplex, and then a fourplex on the end of it. But as you drove down the street, you would never know what you were looking at because of the way they were designed to be, compatible. They didn't look any different than each other. So that's that conversation is how do you get that into the code to reflect that, but then also have some of that opportunity, or get into the detail about it is, what does that look like moving through both infill and greenfield? Because that's a thing we have a lot of conversations about. I have a lot of conversations with people that say, I would love to live in my neighborhood, but I have to move out of it now because this housing type doesn't fit me anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the big things I hear a lot of people say is, I would love to stay in my neighborhood, but I don't need this much house, or it's not enough house, but I've got to move somewhere else because I have to get a certain product. And that's why I think a little bit what we saw in Plan 2040 and what you're seeing in the steering committee's conversation is what does that start to look like if you want to stay in one kind of neighborhood? How does that neighborhood evolve with you through your life as you progress on? And that's a tough one to kind of comprehend and get around all in one go too.
I think one of the speakers said that those changes could happen not only just with no notice. So you wouldn't necessarily know that your neighbor was building a fourplex instead of, that could just happen. There wouldn't have to be any protest option or any appeal option. Is that correct?
In some instances, that may be correct. Because if you have something by right and it's permissible, then it just is a by right item there. So in certain instances, we're kind of jumping from module 1 into module 3 here a little bit. But as you do that, it's the question of where does that site planning threshold kick in? And that's a policy question about where do you want that to go to. Under current code, anything with 3 or more units requires a site plan. And that site plan comes with an appeal and a protesting degree to it there, but it also has a cost concern. You have to have a certain set of drawings and a certain set of studies to submit to be a complete application for a site plan. So that's, does set an entry point for that process. But it's really a question about is where do you want to draw the line between the standard process of just a building permit or when you trip into that site planning process. And that's a module 3 kind of conversation that we've been kind of looking through. There are some parts of module 3, just to, if I may kind of say, is they're set by state statute. Rezoning processes, special use processes, there's a lot of those that are set by the state statute. Site planning is one of those that you can do as a municipality that kind of fine tune what you would like to see as part of that. So the current threshold is a single family dwelling and a duplex is a direct to a building permit process. There isn't a site plan needed, there isn't anything that comes along with it. Anything of 3 units or more usually trips a site plan. And there's some exceptions and some caveats in the site planning rule, and I'll be honest with you, the site planning exceptions are almost 3 pages long and has all kinds of quirky things in it, so hopefully it doesn't reflect all of that, but it's just, that's a local preference on how that's detailed.
Gary, has the steering committee consulted with any bankers about this kind of zoning? Would it have any effect on property values?
I can't say that, I don't recall any conversations with bankers specifically about property value. I can tell you, though, that there's Lawrence Home Builders Association has weighed in. There's contractors and developers and realtors. There are a broad spectrum of folks that have knowledge there are part of the conversation. That's one of the examples about how this this zoning assignment would be made and how the impacts it might have. You know, you have a neighborhood that, you know, large lots, single-family homes, been around for years and years. Zoned RS7, not necessarily because they're 7,000-foot lots. In fact, that could easily be an RS10 neighborhood. The concern is that by default, the change from RS7 to R2 brings with it multifamily capability inside of a neighborhood that traditionally had just been single-family homes. And yes, it's a true statement to say your lot by lot, you know, rights aren't going to change. That's true. The concern is, though, that the neighborhood, the character of that neighborhood could change. And since it is by right, that there wouldn't be a protest, or there wouldn't be a public process necessarily that you'd have to go through. I vacillate on that. I have a lot of sympathy for that argument, and I do believe that we want to have a process where, as conversion's done, there is a way to, without a tremendous amount of difficulty, if a zoning from R2 to R1 is merited based on the nature of the neighborhood, that's something that becomes a remedy for those that are concerned about an impact to their neighborhood.
It may be a remedy. It may also be a widening of the inequality between what we say we're trying to equalize our neighborhood.
That's the challenge. That's the balance, right?
Absolutely.
That's the balance.
And
we
may see it differently.
Where do you find, I don't know that we do, where do you find the balance between the rights of the neighbors and the long-range goals of the community? Right?
For most of us in the community, our homes may be our biggest assets.
Yeah.
And I think this is a very dramatic change. And I'm going to have some difficulty understanding it better, I think.
I found that working through scenarios has helped me.
That's a good question.
For what that's worth.
Yeah.
Jeff, sorry, I have a question. I'm looking at a draft here, and on table 20-3-2, it's showing that RS5 and RS7 will convert to R2, and that multi-unit dwelling is not allowed.
Page 37.
What was that page again, if I may ask?
It looks like it's page 37.
Yeah, page 37 out of 553 of the.
Yeah. That's what pulled up for me as well.
Okay. Oh, okay. So it's page 18 in the print document.
Page number 18. Yeah.
Okay, I was looking at the wrong number. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And your question again?
Yes. Just out of curiosity, if the RS5 and RS7 as it converts to R2, it's looking at here that the multi-unit dwelling would not be allowed, but we were talking about fourplex. So I'm trying to find out, yes, what will be allowed and what not.
Yeah, how is the 4-unit allowance, but then the multi-unit dwelling is not allowed?
So 4 units per acre, so if an acre's 40 some odd thousand feet.
Yeah.
On an acre zoned R2, there would be required 4 dwelling units. If you have a half acre, 20,000, 22,000 feet, you'd have to have a minimum of 2 dwelling units.
But they would not be
They could be
multi-unit.
single, right,
They have to be single unit.
Oh, got it.
Not
It has to be a
so-
single unit, but 4 doors.
And with lot sizes that go quite a bit smaller than what the old RS7 minimum.
Okay.
Doesn't require it. That can be, you can have 4 11,000 square foot lots. So it doesn't have to be a dramatic change different, but it does allow for more.
So what I think what we're getting to is really in the use table, which is in document page on the bottom right-hand side, 93, which sets out if you're in a district, what you go to for your uses there. So under certain situations, you may be zoned in a certain district, but you may not have the square footage to have multiple units or have 2 units in the instance. Great example is in the current land development code, you can have certain districts can have a minimum of 6,000 square feet and be zoned for 2 units, but they're not eligible for 2 units because you need 7,260 square feet to make that work.
Got it.
So this is kind of setting up that entry of that if you can have this in the use table, but you're going to need X number of square feet for a particular use to be enabled. So while you may have that as an ability, you may need more land to actually activate that to that number of unit.
That makes sense.
Sorry about that. I was wandering the code.
No.
The problem I have now is I have old code and half the new code memorized, and I have to stop and think which code is in which section now, and it's not working well for me.
Could you talk just a little bit, Jeff, about the planned process for zoning, name reassignment, and then what might an applicant do, a neighborhood do, if they thought they should be zoned differently?
So what will happen is Article 1 will usually basically lay out a transition table, would be kind of give you that item. And so if you were this, you convert to that, and it'll just line that out in Article 1. So what was RS5 goes to this, RS3 goes to this, RS7 goes to this. That lines it out there. So what Elizabeth and I think has been brought up and we've had discussions about is having a period after the adoption of a certain number of months to have people elevate those and go, this conversion, yes, it's right, but it doesn't fit. So to do a just capture all blanket rezoning process brought forward, so if something doesn't look aligned or doesn't seem to work, then in one rezoning we could get those all wrapped up and taken care of. And so I'm giving a very crash course level on a very deep discussion. And I wish Elizabeth was here to correct me on some of those details, but that's one of the things we're looking at is to have a period after the code adopts is to say, bring these up now or this is the moment to bring them up, or we're going to continue with the map as it is, and then otherwise it goes into the straight rezoning process. And then if you want to rezone, you can definitely do it. So that's something we're exploring and trying to get the details on too.
And would that be neighborhood by neighborhood or property by property? And who would have an opportunity to say, yeah, I should be different?
That's one of those details we're still trying to iron out and get to. So Elizabeth probably has a much better answer that I don't happen to have at the moment.
Progress.
Right.
And of course, I should also take a moment to note is, I think she said it, and I'm probably not going to do it nearly as eloquently, is this is a living document. And so what you end up doing when you adopt a code like this is you do what's called a shakedown period. And so you live with it for a certain number of months, and when you find all the things you don't like or that didn't work, or you find that comma that is not in the right spot or whatever it happens to be, you do one text amendment to get those all cleaned up in one go. And so I would expect probably you'd see one of those at year 1 and probably at year 2 to help capture all of that. So if we've got something in here that's not working right, it's our chance to kind of, get it, maybe a deeper look at it. But if it's just one of those things where it's like, this citation is wrong, we need to get that one, or this isn't meshing well, we need to adjust that to get it here, you would do that in those kind of reviews right after the code adopts. So just because we would adopt it doesn't mean it's set in stone in perpetuity. We would keep working through it to make sure it behaves and gets that part that the community expects it to do.
Other discussion? Do you have something?
Let me just look. I really want to capture thoughts, and if anyone has a specific thing that they say, man, this really needs to be looked at differently by the steering committee, I'd love you to bring it. I can bring that back and be your voice in that group.
Oh, I have some
If
things.
it doesn't happen today, you can always holler at me separately too. But.
Yeah, no, I do have some more things. I'm just trying to make sure that I don't dominate.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Several people brought up, is there a process to appeal or overturn an administrative decision? That was brought up by several people. And how would that be?
You're talking, Charlie, about so if they're in an R3 and somebody wants to build multifamily, that they would be required to go through a process, or that there be an appeal process for that as opposed to it just being by right?
If an administrative decision is made, then is there any appeal that people would have for just an administrative decision that is not public, it is just done that nobody would know is occurring until after it occurred? And several people brought that up.
I got to look at Jeff as well for that.
There is. Administrative appeals can be typically turned over to the Board of Zoning Appeals, or if there's an appeal of a site plan, it would go to the City Commission typically, or if there's other items like that, there are appeal processes built in for administrative processes.
We aren't restricting a person's right to appeal an administrative process.
No, not to my knowledge. The appeal process that we have, I think, is getting carried forward pretty well intact from what's currently in code today.
I thought there were going to be more administrative decisions under this than there have been in the past.
The draft as the steering committee's got it currently, yes, and those are all appealable.
Okay.
And how are they? Are they all appealable to the Board of Zoning Appeals rather than the City Commission?
I'd have to go look. I think it may vary a little bit case by case because some of those are appealed based on state statute. Some of those are appealed based on how it's drawn. Like site plans go to City Commission versus the Board of Zoning Appeals. But I think it can depend on what is the administrative item in question is how it sets out.
Because I understand it's designed to make the process of development go faster. But if it's putting more items into the Board of Zoning Appeals, it is taking it away from the policy makers of the City Commission and putting it essentially into a court process.
I don't know. I have to look. I don't know what that appeal language is off the top of my head because I'm still blending codes a little bit. But right now, what it is, an appeal in today's current code, I should really preface that out there, an appeal of administrative determination typically goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Right.
And I guess another big thing that people brought up, the floodplain, the flood zone, and what is going to change about that.
Yeah, real quick before we move to that, I just want to see if anybody else wants to talk about the administrative decisions and whatnot, just so we can flesh that out so that everyone's heard on that. Does anybody, I do think I still have some questions. I don't have them formulated yet, but I'm still getting public feedback and comment about the changes dealing with the administrative decisions and those changes. So I know in the future, maybe at the mid-month, or I'm still hearing about that, but I haven't fully fleshed all that out, just to be frank. I don't have it formulated yet, but so Charlie.
And several people mentioned about floodplain and development there and wanting to ban building in the floodplain. That was a fairly big item of discussion, I think, from the public. Where are we with that?
I will say I'm confused with it. I asked a couple times about where we're at with floodplains, and I kind of hear that, we have the most stringent statutes, and it's going to be the same. And then I raised something at mid-month about it, and it was, we're following basically the same process that we follow now. And I think that might all be true, but I'm still a little bit confused about exactly how we're handling floodplains and what, if any, changes there are, and maybe we should make a bigger change towards looking at banning development in the floodplain and also considering the wetlands, et cetera. So I don't have an answer to your question other than to say I too have questions about that.
I'll take a note to try to bring back an overview from our consultant of what we're doing. And I can tell you that this is not conclusive, of course, but there's 154 references to floodplain throughout this code. So it's not ignored, but it also is not prohibited. There's also different aspects of floodplain. There's overlay areas, and there's actual floodplain and floodway, all that become a part of it. But we can have someone speak to us specifically about restrictions and have that in a deeper conversation either in a mid-month or next month.
Yeah.
I was interested in the change in the rates for insurance, depending on what kind of floodplain regulations we have, and I thought that might be of interest to everyone. One of our speakers mentioned that it would go, currently now we get a 10% discount based on our restrictions, but we could have a much higher discount if we had.
You mean a homeowner has
I beg your pardon?
has a homeowner's, individual homeowner's insurance?
No, it's what happens if you have a flood policy with your insurance carrier. What you participate in is called a community rating service, and it's a program that's done by FEMA, and it lines out quite a list of things that you can do to score points to change what's called your rating. And I can't remember our rating off the top of my head, but there's a list of things you can do, and a great detail of them are outside of even the land development code. So it includes things about how you do pavement and street sweepers that are involved and any number of other things in there. And so that one's probably a little bit beyond the code in that respect. This would be a component of that one, but that program is a lot larger undertaking than just the land development code.
Isn't it true that it would be affected by any floodplain regulations that we have in our land development code?
I would have to check on that. I believe so, but I don't know that for certain, and I don't know the detail to it. Because one of the things our code doesn't have right now is we don't have stream buffer standards, and we don't have a grading permit. And those are some things that are getting introduced into this code, which would be the first time we've ever had those. This would also help us introduce a fancy planner acronym. It's called a BMP, or a best management practice document for stormwater. And so while MSO has one, this would help us outline what those practices would look like under certain conditions. If you do this, it needs to be this standard. And so we're looking at doing what the Mid-America Regional Council in Kansas City has and carrying their good work forward as part of that. So there's a lot of things that are not floodplain, but are floodplain. They're just kind of tacked together, and they start to do that. So there's a lot of new things that are coming through that code, and I am definitely wouldn't be able to give you all the details on how that affects the CRS program right now. I just don't happen to know that detail intimately.
Along those same lines, I'm also interested, there was public comment about in Article 16, kind of talking about no public hearing and no public oversight with some of this. And so that may be answered by some of the stuff that you're looking into or whatever, but I'd be interested specifically kind of about how that is handled, right? Either in comparison or just how it would be going forward.
Public oversight, I want to make sure that I understand. So in a scenario where
I believe there might be a spot where it says that there is some administrative approval of building in the floodplain. And I don't know for a fact, but I'm kind of guessing. I had that question a few months ago. I'm guessing public comment maybe addressed something like that, right?
But you're talking floodplain.
Yeah, talking about floodplain.
Gotcha. Sorry.
Public
I was going
oversight,
someplace. Okay.
public hearing, opportunity for public hearing, making sure that there's the due process with the floodplains.
Got it.
And also I'm interested in if there's thoughts about or building on wetlands, like if that's been discussed and where we're at with that. There was some mention of that in public comment, but I'm also very interested in that.
Wetlands is unique to floodplain.
So.
Okay.
That's something we can take a look at. There's a lot of limitations placed on that by the state because they have to review and approve that, and I don't know the particulars on the details for that one, but it's something we can take a look at.
I just think they are a unique area that we should, especially in today's climate situation, we should look at.
Jane, I was hoping you'd move the microphone, another microphone over by Chelsea.
Oh, sorry. I appreciate it. I'm a Hayden. I just figure everybody can hear me everywhere I go. We're known for being loud. Okay.
Thank you, Jane.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Anything else regarding like the floodplains or the environmentally sensitive lands or wetlands that we had heard public comment about tonight?
I have a process question related to your comment, Commissioner Hayden, about not being certain as to what was changing in this area. And I think earlier in the process, we were assured that as we got closer to final consideration of the code, that we would be provided some overview of this is what's changing and this is what's staying the same. And I certainly, in the document that we have currently, there are some areas that I think do a better job of that, with footnotes of, hey, this is the setback right now, this is what it's changing to, et cetera. But I guess I'm curious, as we look forward to this potential more final draft arriving next month, will that be accompanied with slides or reports or tables or red lines or anything to help guide us in doing the compare and contrast?
Yeah, I know Clarion's been working on that, but with the thing still kind of moving, the steering committee still going through it, I think they're waiting to find out, what that end is before they kind of put it all down. But I think that's the expectation, is to have something that you can look at and go, here's the big things, here's the, the details to it, even before you go to that red line edition. So I think that's still in the works. It's just because this is still moving a little bit, probably still in process.
You're talking about today's code versus new code, and the red line is going to be changes within the draft, right?
Right. A red line between new code and old code would almost be...
It would be
right.
Yeah.
Not useful.
Yeah, it'd probably just be one big red line with
bullet point comparisons or...
Key feature changes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
right.
that was, yeah.
Changes, yeah.
Elizabeth kind of gave you that kind of a heads up on that memo, I think maybe 2 meetings, if not 3 meetings ago, that would be something that's in process. And I think this has just been moving around a little bit. And so instead of writing it to rewrite it, I think they're waiting for it to stop, kind of get into a more solid state, and then get that for y'all.
Right. Sounds good.
We'll take a note on that too.
Other topics that people are interested in either discussing or raising for Commissioner Rexford to take to the steering committee or to learn more about for us?
I'd like to know if the question of adaptive reuse on historic properties has made it up to the steering committee to discuss.
I've captured that. I've got that in the list of things that we've talked about. Be more specific, Jane, about what you'd like to see. I have an email from you where you talked in general terms. What I lack and what I'd love to have, I think the steering committee would benefit from, is a specific recommendation on what you'd like to see different.
I would leave that really to the staff, because what I've heard is that we had some, the city commission didn't like it, so we dropped it off. So I think probably Jeff has the most knowledge about how we can help save our historic properties.
I hope I have the knowledge here. This actually predates me to some degree too. So the 2006 Land Development Code had a pretty good section on what an adaptive reuse would do. And through a text amendment process, that was removed and really generated a disconnect between Chapter 20, which is land development, and Chapter 22, which is the Historic Resources Code. And so there's never, after that text amendment, there's never been a real good connection between the two codes. And what you see in historic resources is you don't want to lose the structure, but you want to have the ability to have a future. So if you think of other projects around town here, the Watkins Museum started as a bank, but it adaptively reused into a museum. KU has done any number of buildings where they've started as one thing and they've evolved into another thing. Probably the most memorable of those is the Hall Center for the Humanities. It started off as a storage warehouse and has turned into a different venue. Under our code right now, that disconnect really makes it cumbersome for an applicant to navigate, and it makes it very difficult for someone to be able, even for staff, to advise them on the process, because it is very, it's missing some key parts that you would typically have. And so, yeah, I think the conversations we've had with Clarion and we've heard in the process is that needs to be more, that needs to be there, it needs to be connected, and it needs to be carried forward, because those buildings are going to be with us. And if they're part of our identity and part of our community, they may not always want to serve as what they've been. Polar Lofts is a great example of one that's been reused, but we can keep the building and give it a new use to continue it in the future. So yeah, that's one of the things where staff is looking forward to, is because we would love to have that reconnection of those codes to take buildings that we see as ourselves, like this is what makes Lawrence, and give them a use that carries them on for another 100 or 200 years. So yeah, something we're definitely tracking to.
Good.
And that's in Article 16 currently. It appears with the Historic Resource Commission, there's information in there associated with that from what I can see.
I think that's a little bit for HRC. I think it's in Article 9 is where the adaptive reuse section currently lies. I think it's in Article 9 of the new code is where that's currently residing.
Okay,
So Article 9, it's on page 230 of the full document, 211 in the document.
Okay, thank you.
And just something you all probably know but may not have also know is that the city just recently adopted a revised Chapter 22 for historic resources. And so we've been working with Clarion and they've been working with us to kind of make sure that whatever's coming in the land development code is going to tie into that now adopted 22. So to have some good bridging between those two has already kind of been in the works.
Great.
Jane,
Charlie?
I'll put you on the
sorry.
spot. Have you read through what's in this code right now? And
As far as historic resources are concerned.
adaptive reuse,
Yeah.
historic resources?
No, I have not. I knew that that was something that was going to be paid attention to, so
Yeah, there's a section there. Could I ask you to, not right this minute, of course, but take a look at that and let's talk about what
I
change
certainly
you'd
will
like to make?
try.
Okay.
If I can, maybe Jeff could print it out for
I'll
me. Great. If you don't mind. Thank you.
Commissioner Thomas, were you going to say something?
So, the young lady, is your last name Infield? Okay, so Mandy Infield brought up earlier, and there was a discussion about the 3-minute time period, and I got the sense that perhaps we are looking at a change in this. Or when you look away like that,
I'm not sure people maybe, but not to my knowledge. Like I don't know of any movement to change the public comment. But we can certainly have that conversation.
Because, I think it is a universal agreement. 3 minutes is not enough. Well, is 10 minutes too much, or 5 or 7 or whatever? But I would like to have heard the rest of your document where you had your 9 minutes, one on each, that I think we really do need on some things more time. Now, that can also create problems, that it can be abused. But here is, we are doing some historic changes perhaps, and even though it is a living document, it's like molasses too. It is slow to change. It may be alive, but changing it is difficult. And so I'd really like to hear I'd like to see about changing the time limit on some things.
Yes, I very much appreciated the almost debate-like speeches this evening to get everything into the 3-minute time period. So I think maybe that's something that we could talk about. I think you've raised a couple different issues though there. Like I don't even know the legality of allowing changing public comment for particular issues versus an actual change. One commission having something different than other commissions. So I think that's something we would have to consult with staff on and just kind of figure out what are even the options and what is something like that. But certainly something that could be looked into going forward. That's my thought on that. I don't know if maybe somebody knows the answer to that question, but I don't.
So I'll just offer a thought. I think your observations on what goes into that time limit, what's in the bylaws. It's not just it's not necessarily a simple thing. But your point about having a forum where longer sentences, more time to really drain a topic, have some dialogue, I think is great as well. I said it before, I said it again, we do have some forums established for that conversation. And we're able to attend that. We're able to be a part of those and have discussions. We might also, if it's something that's desired, I just throw this out, put Becky on the spot just a bit. We talked about having instead of it just being only neighborhood-oriented meetings, have another meeting that was more open to the public. Maybe we do something like that where, as planning commissioners, it's designed for us to be able to hear those longer conversations. I'm with you. I don't want to stop that process. Changing the bylaws might not happen soon enough for us to get through that now.
And just as a clarifying thing is that the 3 minutes is at the chair's discretion. It can be lengthened in the bylaws based on the chair's discretion on topics that have those items. So it's not anything that's automatic. The 3 minutes is the automatic part, but it's chair's discretion on that, and there's process in the bylaws that allow for it.
And that process is?
Chair's discretion.
Oh.
Yeah. And I mean, I am sure that someone could make a motion as well, right, to ask for more time. And again, it would be to the chair's discretion. But I think if the commission was looking for more time, that's a conversation that could be had and would be taken in consideration by the chair. But I know that that's my understanding is that you weren't raising it necessarily for just this issue. And so if that's the case, then that's a larger conversation for later and involves more people and more knowledge than I think any of us up here have. Other topics? I know that I don't need to hash them out this evening. We're coming on 9 o'clock, but I am interested in eventually some kind of discussion. The presentation this evening, there was more opportunity for single-family homes, and I'd just like to have a discussion about how that plays out so I can visualize that in my head, because I'm hearing from the public that they actually, and from maybe some of the development community, that they don't necessarily feel like that it will increase single-family homes being built. So I just want to know more about that so that I have information on that. I'm also interested in, there were some comments about pre-application process disclosure. So once an application is filed, the disclosures for the pre-application process, I think that's something I'm interested in having more discussion on. And then, and this is a huge one, but just kind of how this impact of the switch from a maximum to a minimum has been handled in other communities, and like how that really will play out, and will it do the things that we're hoping for it to do, or what are the impacts of that on the location of development, the location maybe impact then on our schools and the tax implications of where that may put the development pressure or locate development. So those are just some topics that I know that at some point I'd be interested in discussing.
Can I get clarification on that last one?
Yeah.
Specifically referring to parking?
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking about the maximum. So correct me if I'm wrong, the current code has maximum requirements, so you can only build up to a certain amount, and we are flipping the philosophy of that. So the proposed code has R3 and or somewhere and above, R2 or R3 and above, they have a requirement of a minimum density instead of a suggested maximum, right? Okay. And so I think that's like a policy decision, but it has implications, and I'm just hearing people having questions about what the local implications may be of that larger policy.
Yep.
I'm also interested in that, and I'd be particularly interested in any communities that are college communities that are our size, because yes. I think that may be a unique set of factors.
Yes, I actually had that down as well. Like, what does this situation do when we know that we have college rentals that may or may not be happening in other communities that are switching from the maximum to minimum? And that also maybe affects the parking question as well, being a college town.
And kind of an unrelated, but very related in my mind, is when are we going to have a new housing survey? We've got an old housing survey. We don't really know what we have in terms of housing, and yet we seem to know that we need more.
Are you talking about the housing market survey?
Mm-hmm.
The Housing Initiatives Division in Planning and Development Services is currently working to get one of those underway.
What does that mean?
They've got all the funding in place. They're trying to figure out how to get to a consultant to have a new study done. They're trying to work that out right now. I think the last one was done in 2018. Yep. And so, yeah, that's the one they're trying to get an update to at the moment.
It would seem to me it would make a lot of sense, particularly when we're talking about increasing density. We have the facts of what we are now.
So at this time, it's 9 o'clock. We obviously have more time if we would like to discuss that this evening. We will be addressing this at our next mid-month, and there will be a public opportunity for people to participate and to weigh in. So this is not our last conversation or opportunity to raise any issues on this. Is there anyone who would like to raise a discussion point on a particular topic, or kind of like me list some of the topics that they know they're going to eventually want to have, so that fellow commissioners can be thinking through some of those or provide input? All right, I am getting the sense that we have exhausted this topic for this evening. So with that, we will close this item. There is no vote to be had. So we will move on then to the miscellaneous new or old business. And that is where we will be considering a appointment to the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Organization Policy Board. And I will be looking for a nomination.
I had an opportunity to visit with Sharon Ashworth today. She does have an interest in serving on that board. She wished that she could be here to express that herself, but she's traveling for work, and asked that I nominate her, which I do now. I nominate Sharon to fill that position.
Wonderful.
Second that nomination.
Wonderful. Any discussion? Everyone's just relieved that she has volunteered. Is that what I hear?
She's going to be great.
Oh, she's going to be fantastic. I'm excited.
Yeah, she's going to be wonderful.
We lost one cyclist. We're getting another one. And that is a different perspective that has been valuable.
Yes.
It has been valuable.
She'll bring that for sure.
Yes. All right. All in favor of that appointment, raise your hands.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Any abstentions? All right. Motion carries. And with that, I will look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We want to be here all night? All right. Motion carries. Thank you.